The dust-laden wind whipped across Clara Donovan's face as the stagecoach lurched to a halt before a weathered wooden house standing solitary against the vast Dakota Territory landscape. The year was 1878, and Clara had traveled over 1,000 miles to marry a man she'd never met, clutching nothing but a crumpled letter and the promise of a better life. "This is it, madam," the driver called down, already unloading her trunk. "Thornton Daniels' place, just like you asked." Clara stepped down carefully, her boots touching Dakota soil for the first time. The journey from Boston had been arduous, 5 days by train followed by 2 more by stagecoach, each mile carrying her further from everything familiar. At 22, she'd never imagined herself becoming a mail-order bride, but her parents' deaths and mounting debts had left her with precious few options. "Are you certain this is correct?" she asked, surveying the modest homestead. The house stood 2 stories tall with a small porch, weathered by years of harsh prairie elements. No smoke curled from the chimney. No welcoming face appeared at the door. The driver set her trunk beside her. "This is the Daniels place, no question about it. 10 miles out from Cottonwood Springs, just as directed." He tipped his hat. "Good luck to you, madam." Before Clara could protest, the stagecoach was pulling away, leaving her alone with the whistling wind and the empty house. She smoothed down her travel-worn blue dress and gathered her courage. Perhaps Mr. Daniels was merely delayed. Their correspondence had been brief, but promising, a widower with land and livestock who needed a wife, a woman who could cook and keep a home. She'd sent her daguerreotype. He'd wired train fare. Clara approached the porch, her trunk left temporarily in the yard. The door was locked, but she discovered a key hanging from a nail beneath the window ledge, just as Mr. Daniels had mentioned in his last letter. With trembling hands, she unlocked the door and stepped inside. The interior was neat, but sparse: a table with 4 chairs, a cast-iron stove, shelves with provisions, and a modest parlor with a rocking chair and small sofa. There was no sign of recent habitation. She called out hesitantly, "Hello, Mr. Daniels?" Only silence answered. Clara spent the next hour exploring the house, finding a bedroom upstairs that she presumed was Mr. Daniels's, and another smaller room with only a bed frame, no mattress. The house had been prepared for someone, but clearly not for immediate arrival. The pantry held basic provisions: flour, sugar, coffee beans, and preserved goods. The water bucket by the pump was empty. As afternoon waned toward evening, Clara's initial determination began to falter. She had managed to retrieve her trunk, light the stove, and put on a kettle for tea, but anxiety gnawed at her. What if Mr. Daniels had changed his mind? What if some misfortune had befallen him? The vast emptiness of the prairie suddenly felt threatening rather than promising. She was standing on the porch, watching the sunset paint the plains in gold and crimson, when she spotted a figure on horseback approaching from the east. The rider came steadily closer, a tall silhouette against the darkening sky. Clara's heart quickened. This must be him, Thornton Daniels, her future husband. The horseman slowed as he approached the house, clearly surprised to see someone waiting. He was broader than she'd imagined, with shoulders hardened by physical labor. His face, shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat, was weathered and tanned, with several days' growth of beard. He looked to be in his early 30s, his eyes a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin. He dismounted in one fluid motion and stood regarding her with an unreadable expression. Neither spoke for a long moment as they took each other's measure across the yard. "Mr. Daniels," Clara finally ventured, "I'm Clara Donovan from Boston." When he didn't immediately respond, she added nervously, "Your bride. We corresponded about home," he said simply, the single word carrying a weight Clara couldn't decipher. He seemed to be processing her presence as if she were a mirage he hadn't expected to find on his doorstep. Clara clasped her hands tightly. "I arrived this afternoon. The stage driver left me here, but no one was home. I found the key where you mentioned in your letter." Thornton Daniels removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the temples. "You're early," he finally said. "Wasn't expecting you for another week." Clara felt a flush of embarrassment. The letter said the 15th of May. June, he corrected, his expression softening slightly. The 15th of June. An awkward silence fell between them. Clara's mind raced. A month early, no wonder the house wasn't prepared. No wonder he seemed so shocked. What must he think of her, arriving unannounced with nowhere else to go? "I'm sorry for the confusion," she began. "Perhaps I could find lodging in town until—" "Home," he said again, this time more gently. He gestured toward the house. "It's your home now too, Miss Donovan, just earlier than planned." With those words, Thornton led his horse toward the small barn behind the house, leaving Clara to wonder what sort of man she had traveled so far to marry, and what sort of life awaited her in this vast, empty land. The first night was an exercise in awkward courtesy. Thornton insisted Clara take his bedroom while he made a bed for himself downstairs. He spoke little over the simple supper she managed to prepare from the pantry stores, answering her questions with minimal words. No, he hadn't expected her for another month. Yes, he'd been working in the eastern fields all day. No, there wasn't much social life in these parts. "I should have prepared better," he said as they sat across from each other at the table. "Would have if I'd known." "Please don't worry," Clara assured him, trying to hide her discomfort. "I understand it was my error." Thornton studied her for a moment. "It's a hard life out here, different from Boston." "I'm prepared for that," she replied, though in truth, nothing could have prepared her for the isolation she felt, for the vastness of the sky and land that seemed to diminish human concerns to insignificance. "We'll see," was all he said. That night, lying in Thornton's bed surrounded by the unfamiliar scents of sage and leather, Clara allowed herself a moment of doubt. The man downstairs was a stranger, taciturn, reserved, nothing like the somewhat formal but warm person she'd constructed from his letters. Had she made a terrible mistake? She woke before dawn to the sounds of movement downstairs. By the time she'd dressed and made her way to the kitchen, Thornton was already preparing to leave. "I've got cattle to tend," he explained, not quite meeting her eyes. "Be back midday." "I'll have dinner ready," she promised, trying to establish some normalcy. He nodded, then paused at the door. "The neighbors, the Hendersons, are 3 miles west, if you need anything." And then he was gone, leaving Clara alone in a house that didn't yet feel like home. Clara spent the morning taking inventory and making lists. The pantry needed stocking, the second bedroom required a mattress and linens, and the entire house could benefit from a woman's touch. She found pencil and paper in a drawer and wrote down everything she would need from town. When that was done, she rolled up her sleeves and began to clean. By the time Thornton returned, the house smelled of soap and the stew she'd managed to prepare. He stepped inside, momentarily taken aback by the transformation. "You've been busy," he observed. "I hope you don't mind," Clara said. "I thought I should make myself useful." For the first time, something like approval crossed his face. "No, it's good, thank you." They ate in companionable silence, less strained than the night before. After the meal, Thornton cleared his throat. "I need to ride into town tomorrow for supplies. You should come. Get what you need for the house." Clara brightened. "I'd like that." "I made a list," he nodded. "We'll leave after the morning chores." That evening, they sat in the parlor as darkness fell. Thornton in the rocking chair cleaning his rifle, Clara mending one of his shirts she'd found with a torn sleeve. The domestic scene felt surreal to Clara, playing house with a man who was still essentially a stranger. "Mr. Daniels," she began, "I realize our arrangement has begun awkwardly, but I want you to know I intend to fulfill my part of our agreement. I'll work hard to make this a proper home." Thornton looked up from his rifle. "Thornton," he said, "or Thorn if you prefer. No need for formalities if we're to be married." "Thornton," she repeated, testing the name. "And when might that be? The marriage, I mean." His hands stilled on the rifle. "The circuit preacher comes through the first Sunday of every month. That's 10 days from now. Unless you'd prefer to wait?" "No," Clara said quickly. "That seems appropriate." He studied her for a moment. "You're not what I expected, Clara Donovan." "Is that good or bad?" she asked, suddenly unsure. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Just an observation." The next morning brought their journey into Cottonwood Springs, a modest frontier town consisting of one main street with essential businesses: general store, blacksmith, saloon, small hotel, and a doctor's office. Clara sat beside Thornton on the wagon seat, acutely aware of his proximity and the occasional glances townsfolk sent their way. At the general store, Thornton introduced her to the proprietor, Mr. Jenkins, a round man with spectacles and a friendly manner. "So you're the Boston bride," Jenkins exclaimed, pumping her hand. "We've been wondering when you'd arrive. Thornton here's been fixing up that old house for months." Clara glanced at Thornton, who looked uncomfortable with this revelation. "It's lovely to meet you," she said politely. While Thornton discussed feed prices with Jenkins, Clara explored the store, adding items to her basket: thread, fabric, a few small decorative items she could afford. She was examining a quilt when a woman's voice spoke behind her. "You must be Thornton Daniels' mail-order bride." Clara turned to face a woman perhaps 10 years her senior, dressed plainly but neatly, with kind eyes and a direct manner. "I am. Clara Donovan, from Boston." "Rebecca Henderson," the woman introduced herself. "My husband and I farm west of the Daniels place. I'm pleased to finally meet you." "We were beginning to think Thornton had invented you," Clara smiled. "I arrived early, a misunderstanding about dates." Rebecca nodded knowingly. "That explains why he didn't announce it. How are you finding our little corner of the territory?" "It's quite different from Boston," Clara admitted. "I imagine so. Listen, we're having a gathering this Sunday after church, nothing fancy, just neighbors sharing a meal. You and Thornton should come, meet some folks." Clara hesitated. "That's very kind. I'll need to ask Mr. Daniels." "Ask me what?" Thornton appeared at her side, arms full of supplies. Rebecca spoke before Clara could. "Sunday dinner at our place after church. You're both coming. No excuses this time, Thornton Daniels." To Clara's surprise, Thornton nodded. "We'll be there." After Rebecca departed, Clara helped Thornton load their purchases. "She seems nice," she ventured. "The Hendersons are good people," he acknowledged. "David helped me raise the barn last year." Clara gathered her courage. "Mr. Jenkins mentioned you've been fixing up the house for months." Thornton's hands stilled on a sack of flour. "Wanted it to be right," he said simply. Clara felt something warm unfurl inside her. He'd been preparing for her arrival, making a home for a woman he'd never met. Perhaps there was more to this taciturn man than met the eye. Their journey back to the homestead was filled with glimpses of what her new life would entail. Thornton pointed out landmarks: the creek that never ran dry, the ridge where wolves sometimes appeared in winter, the distant smudge of trees that marked the Henderson property. Clara tried to memorize each detail, to situate herself in this new landscape. As they approached the house, Clara saw it differently now, not as a strange, isolated dwelling, but as the center of the life she was beginning to build. Thornton had crafted this place for them, board by board. "Thank you," she said suddenly. He glanced at her, questioning. "For making a home," she clarified. "For sending for me." Thornton's eyes held hers for a moment before returning to the trail. "It's not much," he said quietly. "It will be," Clara promised. The days that followed established a tentative rhythm. Thornton rose before dawn to tend the livestock and fields, returning midday for dinner. Clara kept the house, learned to operate the temperamental stove, and began putting her feminine touch on their shared spaces: curtains, fashioned from fabric purchased in town, wildflowers in jars on the table, the careful arrangement of their few books on a shelf Thornton had built. They began to learn each other in small ways. Clara discovered Thornton liked his coffee strong and took honey in his tea, that he had a hidden appreciation for poetry, evidenced by a worn volume of Wordsworth she found among his possessions. Thornton learned that Clara sang to herself while working, that she was afraid of thunderstorms but tried to hide it, that she could lose herself for hours in a book. Still, there remained a careful distance between them. They occupied the same space, but moved around each other with deliberate courtesy. At night, Thornton continued to sleep downstairs while Clara used the master bedroom, an arrangement that would presumably change after their wedding. The wedding. The thought filled Clara with a complex mix of emotions. In less than a week, she would legally bind herself to this man she was still coming to know. Their contract would be fulfilled, but what of their hearts? Sunday arrived bright and clear. Clara wore her best dress, a modest blue affair with lace at the collar and cuffs. When she descended the stairs, she found Thornton waiting, freshly shaved and dressed in clean clothes, his usually unruly hair tamed with water. "You look nice," he said, the compliment clearly unpracticed. "Thank you." Clara smiled, pleased by his notice. "So do you." The church was a simple white building at the edge of town, filled with families from miles around. Clara felt the curious stares as she and Thornton entered, the whispers that followed them to their pew. The preacher, a weathered man named Reverend Walsh, welcomed her publicly, making Clara blush with the sudden attention. "We're pleased to welcome Miss Clara Donovan, recently arrived from Boston to join Mr. Daniels," he announced, "and I understand I'll be performing a wedding ceremony next Sunday." A murmur of interest ran through the congregation. Clara kept her eyes lowered, aware of Thornton's tension beside her. "Didn't mean to announce it to everyone," he murmured as the service began. "It's all right," Clara assured him, though her own stomach fluttered with nerves. The Henderson farm proved to be larger and more established than the Daniels homestead, with a proper barn and several outbuildings. A dozen or so neighbors had gathered for the meal, which was served outdoors under the shade of large cottonwood trees. Clara was introduced to so many people she feared she'd never remember all the names. "Don't worry," Rebecca told her as they laid out food on long tables. "You'll have plenty of time to get acquainted. We're not going anywhere." Clara found herself seated beside a lively woman named Emma Peterson, whose husband ran the livery stable in town. "So you're brave enough to marry our Thornton," Emma said with a conspiratorial smile. "He's been the most eligible bachelor in the county since he arrived 5 years ago, but none of us could get more than a word or two from him." Clara glanced across the yard where Thornton stood talking with several men. "He is rather reserved," Emma laughed. "That's a kind way to put it, but he's a good man. After the Miller place burned last winter, Thornton was first to offer help rebuilding. Never says much, but shows up when needed." Throughout the afternoon, Clara collected these small insights about her future husband, his reputation for fair dealings, his skill with horses, his quietly generous nature. She began to see him through the eyes of his community, a man respected, if not fully known. As the gathering dispersed, David Henderson approached them. "Almost forgot, Thornton. That stallion of Patterson's broke through the south fence again. Might want to check your boundary line." Thornton nodded. "Appreciate the warning." On the ride home, Clara noticed Thornton seemed preoccupied. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "About the fence Mr. Henderson mentioned?" Thornton's jaw tightened. "Patterson lets his stock roam where they shouldn't. Been an issue for a while." "Is it serious?" He shrugged. "Just boundary disputes. Common enough out here." But something in his tone made Clara wonder if there was more to the story than he was sharing. That evening, as Clara prepared for bed, a sudden commotion outside drew her to the window. In the moonlight, she could make out several horses in their cornfield trampling the young plants. Thornton emerged from the barn with a lantern, moving toward the intruding animals. Without thinking, Clara threw a shawl over her nightdress and hurried downstairs and outside. The night air was cool against her skin as she approached Thornton, who was attempting to herd the horses back toward a broken section of fence. "What can I do to help?" she called. Thornton turned, startled by her presence. "Go back inside," he said, his voice sharp with concern. "Not safe out here in your nightclothes." But Clara was already picking up a fallen branch. "I can help drive them back through the fence," she insisted. For a moment, Thornton looked as though he might argue, but then nodded. "Stay behind me," he instructed. "Wave the branch if they come toward you, but don't get too close." Together they managed to guide the horses back through the broken fence. Thornton quickly lashed together a temporary repair with rope from his pocket. "That won't hold for long," he said, breathing heavily from the exertion. "Who do they belong to, Mr. Patterson?" Clara asked, recalling the earlier conversation. Thornton's expression darkened. "Yes." And this wasn't an accident. The fence was cut, Clara gasped. "But why would someone deliberately—" "Patterson wants this land," Thornton explained grimly. "Has since I bought it, thinks it should have been his." What will you do?" Thornton looked at the damaged fence, then at Clara, standing barefoot in the dirt, her nightdress and shawl inadequate against the night chill. Something in his expression shifted. "First, get you inside before you catch your death," he said, more gently than she'd ever heard him speak. "Then deal with this in the morning." As they walked back to the house, Thornton surprised her by placing his coat around her shoulders, his hand briefly touching her back. The simple gesture felt profoundly intimate in the darkness. Inside, Clara built up the fire while Thornton fetched his rifle, checking it methodically. "Do you expect trouble?" she asked, watching his practiced movements with the weapon. "Hope not, but Patterson's been drinking more lately, getting bolder." He glanced up at her. "I should have warned you before you came. Didn't want to worry you with something that might resolve itself." Clara sat across from him, her hands clasped in her lap. "I'm stronger than I look, Thornton. I'd rather know what we're facing together." He considered her for a long moment. "Together," he repeated, as if testing the word. "I've been handling things alone for so long, I'm not used to sharing burdens." "Well, you'll have to get used to it," Clara said with a small smile. "In 6 days, I'll be your wife. That means your problems are my problems too." The ghost of a smile touched Thornton's lips. "Is that so?" "It is," she affirmed. "Now tell me everything about this Patterson situation." Thornton set the rifle aside and for the first time since her arrival, truly opened up to her. William Patterson owned the largest ranch in the area and had tried to purchase Thornton's land when he first arrived. When Thornton refused to sell, Patterson began a campaign of small harassments, diverting water, letting cattle graze on Thornton's property, spreading rumors in town. "Most folks see through him," Thornton explained, "but he's got money and influence. Makes things difficult sometimes." "Have you spoken with the sheriff?" Thornton shook his head. "Sheriff Carter's Patterson's brother-in-law. Not much help there." Clara frowned, thinking, "What about documentation? Do you have all your property deeds in order?" "Of course," Thornton said, looking slightly surprised by the question. "Good. My father was a lawyer," Clara explained. "He always said that in disputes, proper documentation is essential." Thornton studied her with newfound interest. "You continue to surprise me, Clara Donovan." She felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "I just believe in being prepared. Speaking of which, we should both get some sleep. Tomorrow will be a busy day." Thornton nodded but made no move to retire. Instead, he said, "I'll keep watch downstairs tonight, just in case." Clara wanted to protest, but recognized the stubborn set of his jaw. "Promise you'll wake me if anything happens?" "I promise," he said, though Clara suspected it was merely to appease her. She hesitated at the foot of the stairs. "Thornton, thank you for telling me the truth about Patterson." He met her gaze steadily. "Thank you for asking." That night, Clara lay awake thinking about the man downstairs, so different from what she had expected yet increasingly intriguing. He was a man of few words but deep principles, someone who had carved a life out of this wild country through sheer determination. And now he faced a threat to everything he'd built, just as she was entering his life. Clara knew she should be worried, perhaps even reconsidering her decision to marry a stranger with enemies. Instead, she felt a surprising resolve. This was her home now, too, and she would fight alongside Thornton to protect it. Morning brought a heavy fog that shrouded the homestead in ghostly white. Clara found Thornton on the porch, rifle across his knees, looking as though he hadn't slept. "Any trouble?" she asked, handing him a cup of coffee. He shook his head. "Quiet night." After breakfast, they rode out together to properly repair the fence. Clara insisted on accompanying him, arguing that an extra pair of hands would make the work go faster. In truth, she was reluctant to let him out of her sight, worried about what Patterson might do. The damage was worse in daylight, nearly 20 feet of fence cut and trampled. As they worked side by side, Clara realized this was the first time they had truly labored together. There was something intimate about the shared task, passing tools back and forth, their hands occasionally brushing, working toward a common goal. "You're good at this," Thornton observed as Clara confidently hammered a nail into a fence post. "I'm a quick learner," she replied with a smile, "and you're a good teacher." They had nearly finished the repairs when the sound of approaching horses made them both look up. 3 riders emerged from the fog, the lead man a burly figure with a florid face and expensive clothes. "That's Patterson," Thornton said quietly, standing and moving slightly in front of Clara. William Patterson reined in his horse a few yards away, flanked by 2 younger men who Clara guessed were hired hands. His gaze traveled from Thornton to Clara, then to the repaired fence. "I see you found my strays," Patterson said, his voice falsely pleasant. "And you've brought your mail-order bride out to play farmer. How charming." Clara felt Thornton stiffen beside her. "Your horses broke through because someone cut my fence, Patterson." "We both know it wasn't an accident." Patterson affected a look of surprise. "Cut your fence? Now why would anyone do that? Sounds like you're not maintaining your property properly, Daniels. Perhaps you should reconsider my offer. That Boston girl looks like she'd prefer town living anyway." Before Thornton could respond, Clara stepped forward. "Actually, Mr. Patterson, I'm quite happy here. And we have witnesses who saw the fence before your horses arrived. It was deliberately cut. Sheriff's brother-in-law or not, destruction of property is still a crime in Dakota Territory." Patterson's face darkened. "You'd be wise to teach your woman her place, Daniels." "My place is beside my future husband," Clara replied evenly, "defending our home from those who would take it unlawfully." For a tense moment, Patterson and his men sat their horses, clearly surprised by Clara's boldness. Then Patterson spat on the ground. "This isn't over, Daniels," he growled. "Not by a long shot." With that, he wheeled his horse around and rode off, his men following. Once they were gone, Clara released a shaky breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Thornton turned to her, his expression a mix of concern and admiration. "That was either very brave or very foolish," he said. "Perhaps a bit of both," Clara admitted. "But I meant what I said. This is our home, and I won't be intimidated away from it." Thornton studied her face for a long moment. Then, to Clara's surprise, he reached out and touched her cheek gently with calloused fingers. "Our home," he repeated softly. The moment hung between them, charged with something new and fragile. Then Thornton cleared his throat and stepped back. "We should finish the fence," he said. "Rain coming this afternoon." They worked in companionable silence for another hour, but something had shifted. Occasionally Clara would feel Thornton's gaze on her, thoughtful and assessing, as if seeing her truly for the first time. By the time they returned to the house, dark clouds were gathering on the horizon. Thornton went to secure the animals while Clara prepared a late dinner, her mind replaying the confrontation with Patterson. She had surprised herself with her boldness, speaking up to a man who clearly held power in this community. Yet, it had felt right, standing beside Thornton, declaring their unity. Over dinner, Thornton finally spoke about what had happened. Patterson won't take kindly to being challenged, especially by a woman. "We should be extra vigilant," Clara nodded. "Do you think he'll really try something else? He's a proud man used to getting his way, and he's been trying to push me off this land for years." Thornton hesitated. "Clara, if you're having second thoughts about our arrangement, I'd understand. This isn't what you signed up for." "Actually, I signed up to be your wife," Clara said firmly. "That means standing with you, whatever comes, unless you're the one having second thoughts." Thornton's gaze held hers across the table. "No," he said with surprising certainty. "I'm not." That night, as a storm broke over the prairie, Clara lay listening to the rain pounding on the roof, thinking about the man sleeping downstairs. In less than a week, they would be husband and wife. The thought no longer filled her with anxiety, but rather a curious anticipation. Thornton Daniels was proving to be more complex, more honorable, and frankly, more intriguing than she had initially believed. The next several days passed in a blur of preparations both for their wedding and for potential trouble from Patterson. Thornton taught Clara to handle his spare revolver, a small .31 caliber pocket pistol that fit neatly in her hand. Though she hoped never to use it, the weight of it in her apron pocket gave her a sense of security. On Wednesday, Rebecca Henderson arrived with a basket of preserves and a bundle wrapped in brown paper. "A wedding gift," she explained, handing the package to Clara. "Every bride deserves something special." Inside was a beautiful wedding dress, simple but elegant, with tiny pearl buttons down the back and delicate lace at the collar and wrists. "It was my sister's," Rebecca explained. "She's in Oregon now and said you should have it. I made a few alterations based on what I could guess of your size." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "It's beautiful. I don't know what to say." Rebecca squeezed her hand. "Say you'll wear it, and that you'll let me help you get ready on Sunday." The days continued to pass without further incident from Patterson, though Thornton remained vigilant. Each evening they sat together in the parlor, sometimes in companionable silence, sometimes sharing stories from their lives before. Clara learned that Thornton had grown up in Pennsylvania, the son of a blacksmith, and had come west after the war looking for a fresh start. He'd worked as a ranch hand until saving enough to buy his own land. In turn, Clara told him about her childhood in Boston, her father's law practice, and the financial troubles that followed his death. "I never expected to become a mail-order bride," she confessed one evening. "But after Mother died, too, the creditors took everything. When I saw your advertisement in the paper," she trailed off, suddenly embarrassed. "When you saw my advertisement," Thornton prompted gently. Clara met his gaze. "It wasn't just about security," she admitted. "There was something in the way you described this place. It sounded like freedom." Thornton's expression softened. "And now that you're here? Is it what you hoped?" Clara considered the question honestly. "It's harder," she said finally, "and more beautiful. And I wouldn't trade it for Boston." The night before their wedding, Clara couldn't sleep. She stood at her bedroom window watching moonlight silver the prairie, thinking about the vows she would take tomorrow. Marriage to Thornton had begun as a practical arrangement, but somewhere along the way it had become something more at least for her. She had come to admire his quiet strength, his integrity, the gentle way he treated her despite his outward reserve. But what did he feel for her? He had shown respect, even admiration. But love? Clara wasn't certain. And tomorrow they would be bound together for life. A sound from outside caught her attention, the soft nickering of horses. She peered into the darkness and saw several shadowy figures moving near the barn. Her heart leapt into her throat. Intruders. Quickly, Clara grabbed the revolver from her bedside table and hurried downstairs to wake Thornton. She found him already awake, rifle in hand, peering out the front window. "Patterson's men," he whispered as she approached. "5 of them. They're heading for the barn." "What are they doing?" Clara asked, clutching the revolver. "Likely planning to steal or harm the livestock. Stay here while I—" "No," Clara interrupted. "We face this together." Thornton looked as though he might argue, then nodded once, his expression grim. "Stay behind me. If shooting starts, get down and stay down." They slipped out the back door and circled around toward the barn, using the shadows for cover. As they drew closer, Clara could make out men leading Thornton's horses from the corral. Another man emerged from the barn carrying what looked like a kerosene lantern. "They're going to burn the barn," Thornton whispered, his voice tight with anger. Before Clara could respond, Thornton stepped forward, rifle raised. "That's far enough," he called, his voice carrying in the night air. The men froze, then scrambled for weapons. Clara recognized Patterson among them, his bulk unmistakable even in the darkness. "You're trespassing on my property," Thornton continued, advancing steadily. "Drop your weapons and leave my horses." "Or what?" Patterson called back. "You can't take all of us, Daniels." "He's not alone," Clara said, stepping up beside Thornton, her revolver held steady in both hands the way he had taught her. Patterson laughed. "Hiding behind a woman's skirts now, Daniels?" "Not hiding," Thornton replied. "Standing together. This is your last warning, Patterson. Leave now or face the consequences." The standoff stretched for several tense seconds. Then Patterson raised his own pistol. "Take them!" he ordered his men. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. The crack of gunfire split the night as Patterson fired. Thornton pushed Clara aside, returning fire in the same motion. Men shouted, horses reared in panic, more shots rang out. Clara scrambled to her feet, heart pounding. She saw one of Patterson's men advancing on Thornton, who was exchanging fire with Patterson himself. Without thinking, Clara raised her revolver and fired. The man yelped and grabbed his arm, dropping his weapon. "Clara, down!" Thornton shouted. She dropped just as a bullet whizzed over her head. From her position on the ground, she fired again at the shadows of Patterson's men, not aiming to kill but to drive them back. The exchange of gunfire seemed to last forever, but probably spanned less than a minute. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. Two of Patterson's men dragged him away, the others following, all retreating toward the boundary of Thornton's property. Clara scrambled to Thornton's side, terrified of what she might find. "Are you hurt?" she demanded, hands frantically checking him for wounds. "I'm all right," he assured her, though his voice was tight with pain. "Caught one in the arm, but it's not bad." In the fading moonlight, Clara could see blood seeping through his sleeve. "We need to get you inside," she insisted, helping him to his feet. Once in the house, Clara tended his wound by lamplight, a clean shot through the flesh of his upper arm, painful but not life-threatening. As she cleaned and bandaged it, using skills learned from her mother's volunteer work at the Boston hospital, Clara's hands trembled with the aftermath of fear and adrenaline. "You could have been killed," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "So could you," Thornton replied, watching her face. "Yet you stood your ground. Never seen anything like it." Clara tied off the bandage. "I was terrified," she admitted, "but I couldn't let you face them alone." Thornton caught her hand as she finished, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers. "Clara," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I need to tell you something." She met his gaze, heart stuttering at the intensity in his blue eyes. "When I wrote for a bride," he began slowly, "I was looking for a practical arrangement, someone to share the work, maybe give me children someday. I didn't expect—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "Didn't expect what?" Clara prompted softly. "Didn't expect you," he said simply. "Your courage, your mind, the way you've made this place feel like—" He swallowed hard. "Like home. For the first time since I built it." Clara felt tears welling in her eyes. "Thornton, I'm not good with words," he continued. "Never have been. But I need you to know before tomorrow that this isn't just an arrangement for me anymore. He broke off, frustrated by his inability to express himself. Clara laid her free hand against his cheek. "I know," she whispered. "Me too." For a moment they simply looked at each other in the lamplight, 1,000 unspoken feelings passing between them. Then Thornton leaned forward and kissed her gently at first, then with growing certainty as Clara responded in kind. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Thornton rested his forehead against hers. "If you want to change your mind about tomorrow," he murmured, "after all this danger—" "Try to stop me," Clara challenged, a smile breaking through her tears. They spent the remainder of the night in the kitchen, too wired from the confrontation to sleep. Clara made coffee while Thornton cleaned his rifle, both acutely aware of the new intimacy between them. "What will happen with Patterson now?" Clara asked as dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. Thornton's expression hardened. "He won't stop unless he's forced to. At first light, I'm riding into town to speak with Judge Wilson. He's no friend of Patterson's, and with witnesses to tonight's events, we might finally get some action." "I'm coming with you," Clara said firmly. Thornton looked as though he might protest, then nodded. "Thought you might say that." As the sun rose fully, they rode together toward Cottonwood Springs, tired but resolute. Clara wore her second-best dress, determined to make a proper impression on the judge. Along the way, they stopped at the Henderson farm to recount the night's events and asked David to accompany them as a witness. Judge Wilson proved to be a stern but fair-minded man who listened carefully to their account of Patterson's escalating harassment, culminating in the armed attack. "This has gone on too long," the judge said when they finished. "I've heard rumors about Patterson's methods, but this is the first time someone's brought solid evidence." By noon, Sheriff Carter had reluctantly issued warrants for Patterson and his men. By evening, word spread throughout the county that Patterson had fled rather than face arrest, taking only a few belongings and heading west. "He won't be back," David Henderson assured them as they rode home. "Patterson's a bully, but he's not stupid. With charges of attempted murder and arson hanging over him, he'll keep running." That night, their last before becoming husband and wife, Clara and Thornton sat on the porch watching stars emerge in the vast prairie sky. The events of the past 24 hours had exhausted them both, yet there was a new lightness between them, as if a weight had been lifted. "Never thought it would end this way," Thornton mused. "Been fighting Patterson for years." "Sometimes it takes a new perspective to change things," Clara said, remembering her father's legal advice that had helped build their case. Thornton's hand found hers in the darkness. "Sometimes it takes the right person arriving at your door," he corrected softly. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, as if nature itself approved of their union. Clara spent the morning with Rebecca Henderson, who helped her dress and arranged her hair with wildflowers. "You make a beautiful bride," Rebecca said, stepping back to admire her handiwork, "and a brave one, too, from what I hear." Clara blushed. "I only did what was necessary." "That's more than most would do," Rebecca replied. "You belong here, Clara. I can see it in you already, that pioneer spirit." When it was time, David escorted Clara to the church where Thornton waited. The small building was filled with neighbors and townsfolk, more people than Clara had expected. As she walked down the aisle toward Thornton, she saw his face transform with an emotion so naked it took her breath away. Gone was the reserved, taciturn man who had greeted her that first evening. In his place stood a man looking at her with undisguised love. The ceremony was simple but moving. When the time came to speak their vows, Thornton surprised Clara by setting aside the standard words and speaking from his heart. "Clara Donovan," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "When you stepped off that stagecoach a month early, I thought there'd been a mistake. Now I know it was the best thing that ever happened to me. You turned my house into a home with more than curtains and cooking. You did it with courage and heart. I promise to protect you, provide for you, and spend every day trying to be worthy of the gift you've given me by coming here." Clara, tears flowing freely now, responded in kind. "Thornton Daniels, I came west seeking security but found so much more. You've shown me strength in silence and eloquence in action. I promise to stand beside you through whatever comes, to build our home together, and to love you more each day than the day before." When Reverend Walsh pronounced them husband and wife, Thornton's kiss held a promise of the life they would build together, not perfect or easy, but honest and true. The celebration afterwards at the Henderson farm lasted well into the evening, with food and music and dancing under the stars. Clara was introduced to so many people she lost track of names, but the warmth of their welcome made her feel truly part of this community for the first time. "They've always respected you," she told Thornton as they shared a quiet moment away from the festivities, "but I think they were waiting for you to let them in." Thornton glanced at the gathering, then back at his bride. "Wasn't easy for me, being around people. After the war, I just wanted solitude." "And now?" Clara asked, her hand resting on his arm. Now I want a life, he said simply, with you. Their return to the homestead that night was different from any before. As Thornton lifted her from the wagon, carrying her across the threshold despite his injured arm, Clara felt a sense of rightness, of completion. This was indeed home. Later, as they lay together in what was now truly their shared bedroom, Thornton traced the curve of Clara's cheek with gentle fingers. "I still can't believe you're here," he murmured. "That you stayed after everything." Clara caught his hand and pressed a kiss to his palm. "Where else would I be? Could have run back to Boston after the first sign of trouble. Most would have." "I'm not most people," Clara reminded him with a smile. "And I made a promise to make this house a home. I intend to keep it." Thornton's arms tightened around her. "Home," he said softly, the same word he'd spoken when they first met, but now laden with new meaning. "That's what you've given me, Clara. A real home." In the days and weeks that followed, they settled into married life with surprising ease. The threat of Patterson faded as news arrived that he'd been seen heading for Wyoming Territory, unlikely to return. The community, impressed by Clara's courage during the confrontation, embraced her fully, with women stopping by with welcome gifts and advice for frontier living. Thornton, too, began to change, opening up more not just to Clara but to their neighbors as well. He accepted invitations he would have declined before, attended community gatherings, even hosted a barn-raising party when they decided to expand their livestock operation. By the time autumn painted the prairie in gold and amber, Clara had transformed their house with small touches that reflected their shared life. Thornton's books mingled with hers on the shelves, a quilt they'd selected together on their bed, photographs of both their families displayed side by side. One evening, as the first chill of approaching winter filled the air, they sat together on the porch watching the sunset. Clara, wrapped in Thornton's coat, leaned against his shoulder. "I was thinking," she began tentatively, "about the second bedroom." Thornton glanced down at her. "What about it?" "It might need some work. A proper bed, a rocking chair perhaps, maybe some cheerful curtains." Thornton was silent for a moment, processing her meaning. Then his eyes widened. "Clara, are you saying—" She nodded, unable to contain her smile. "The doctor confirmed it yesterday. We'll need a nursery by spring." Thornton's face transformed with wonder. He gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of precious glass. "A child," he whispered against her hair. "Our child." Clara felt his tears dampen her hair, matching the joyful ones that slid down her own cheeks. "I never imagined I could be this happy," she confessed, "when I stepped off that stagecoach and found an empty house. I was so afraid I'd made a terrible mistake." Thornton drew back to look at her, his eyes shining with emotion. "And now?" "Now I know it was the best decision I ever made," she said, reaching up to touch his face, "because it led me home. To you." As darkness fell around them, they remained on the porch, planning their future, dreaming of the child that would join their family, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The mail-order bride and the taciturn cowboy had found in each other not just a practical arrangement, but a love as vast and enduring as the prairie itself, and a home in the truest sense of the word. 5 years later, Clara stood on that same porch, watching Thornton teaching their 4-year-old son, Thomas, how to ride his first pony. Their 2-year-old daughter, Ellen, sat on Clara's hip, clapping her small hands at her brother's achievement. The homestead had prospered under their joint care. The house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family. The fields yielded abundant crops, and their cattle herd had doubled. What had once been a lonely outpost on the prairie had become a thriving farm and a gathering place for neighbors and friends. Clara thought back to that first day, stepping down from the stagecoach to find an empty house and an uncertain future. How different her life was now, filled with purpose and love and the kind of happiness she had never dared to imagine. As if sensing her thoughts, Thornton looked up and met her gaze across the yard, his smile as warm as the summer sun. In that moment, Clara knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, home, in every sense of the word. The mail-order bride had arrived to an empty house. The cowboy had returned from his fields and said nothing but home, and together they had created something beautiful and lasting on the wild Dakota prairie.